A couple of committee hearings we're keeping an eye on at the state capitol that started at 1 o'clock. In particular, in the House Finance and Policy Committee, they are discussing a bill that would require health plans to cover infertility treatments like IVF and standard fertility preservation services.
I urge you to pass this bill for those struggling with infertility and those who are facing a cancer diagnosis. Further delays in this bill will mean more Minnesotans losing the chance to build the families they dream of. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you for your testimony, Dr. Shenoy. Next up, Maggie Henge, followed by Rebecca Delahunt. Please introduce yourself to the committee and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Chair Bierman, Chair Backer, and members of the committee. My name is Maggie Henge, and I'm the Assistant Director for Family Policy at the Minnesota Catholic Conference, the public policy voice of the Catholic Church in Minnesota. We're speaking today in opposition to House File 4609. Please vote no. When a couple is eager to start their family, but month after month sees a negative pregnancy test, the reality is devastating. They carry a heavy burden, and we have great compassion for their circumstances. But we must recognize that children are gifts. They're not commodities to which we have an automatic right. When we look deeper into the process of these technologies, we face difficult ethical dilemmas. More children are killed at IVF clinics than at Planned Parenthood in a given year. Some reports say that up to 90% of embryos created are never born. Many are discarded as medical waste, donated to science, or left frozen for an indefinite amount of time. To determine which of the embryos will have the best chance at life, pre-implantation genetic testing is often used. In 2020, this was used in about 50% of the cases. PGT is problematic as it can lead to modern-day eugenics. We can now create designer babies with the characteristics and sex desired by their parents. This practice also comes with low success rates. Nationally, 37% of assisted reproductive technology cycles resulted in a live birth. Put the other way, 63% of all cycles fail. And the cost is staggering. It would certainly impact our healthcare premiums. We should not be using taxpayer dollars to coerce people into paying for a practice that's not good medicine or sound ethics. When proponents have tried to say otherwise, one of the more alarming aspects of this bill is that it would allow for taxpayer funding of commercial surrogacy. A single male, for example, who would be considered infertile under the definition of this bill, cannot reproduce without a surrogate who will carry his baby. In practice, surrogacy creates a marketplace where wombs become commodities and children become products. It exploits women and intentionally strips a child of the only mother he or she has known for 9 months. This has detrimental effects for all involved. We should certainly not be funding this practice without properly vetting it through the legislative process. But when discussing infertility, it's important to remember that infertility is not a disease in and of itself. It's a symptom of an underlying condition like a hormonal imbalance, blocked fallopian tube, or endometriosis. Pushing couples towards IVF and related treatments without treating the underlying cause of the infertility is problematic. A better path forward is by promoting and covering restorative reproductive medicine. RRM works with the woman's body to diagnose and treat the underlying health conditions that may be inhibiting her infertility. It is a tailored approach for each person based on her specific needs. It's often cheaper than IVF and more successful. Couples deserve better than being funneled down the assisted reproduction path. We should not misplace our compassion by trying to play God and creating children in a lab, and in some cases, separating them from one or both biological parents. Please vote no. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next up, Rebecca Delahunt. Welcome to the committee. If you would introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony when you're ready.
Yes, thank you. Co-chairs Bierman, Backer, and members of the committee, Rep. Katiza-Wittun, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Rebecca Delahunt, and I work as Director of Public Policy with Minnesota Family Council. House File 4609 would mandate all health plans cover assisted reproduction services. This includes in vitro fertilization and third-party services as included in the bill. Infertility impacts so many Minnesotans, and this is a heartbreaking journey for many in this room and many people we know and love. We do not believe that House File 4609 is the right solution. Lines 3.7 and 3.8 prohibit any restriction on fertility services provided by or to a third party, and the definition of infertility includes an inability to conceive as an individual on lines 2.3 and 2.4. want to make a note that I appreciate Rep. Katiza-Wattoon's comments that she sees this as not including surrogacy, but I don't see how the express language would not be interpreted later to require coverage. In surrogacy, eggs and sperm are sourced either from the person or people who will raise the child, called the intended parents, or purchased from a donor. Eggs and sperm are fertilized into multiple embryonic lives, and one is often selected for implantation based on quality and other characteristics. The gestational carrier, the woman carrying the baby, will hand over the baby immediately upon birth to the IPs. Most surrogacy arrangements are paid, meaning that the surrogate is paid for renting her body, and she must follow contractual requirements on medication, diet, lifestyle, etc. Surrogacy always involves the intentional stripping of a child from the only mother the baby has known, a serious injustice to those children. Though surrogacy agencies may require a background check of IPs, there is no federal or Minnesota law requiring one. There are some Wall Street Journal articles in your packets reporting on Chinese foreign national males having tens of children through U.S. surrogates getting U.S. citizenship and bringing them back to China. Surrogacy costs vary, but after compensation, agency fees, IVF embryo creation and transfer, legal fees, and other costs, the cost can be between $100,000 and $200,000. Taxpayer-funded insurance should not pay for the intentional separation of children from the only mother the baby has known. That's not good public policy making. Surrogacy is not protected in Minnesota statute, and we have argued that it should not be. But it is notable that this bill will likely be interpreted to mandate coverage of an extra statutory practice. Please vote no.
Thank you for your testimony. Any other members of the public wishing to testify? Seeing none, we can move to member discussion of the bill. Representative DePel.
Thank you, Chair Bierman, and for the testifiers and for bringing this bill. I generally support IVF, my brother, and of course, there's a multitude of processes that take place, and I wouldn't have my niece and nephew if it wasn't for IVF and these different procedures. And so in that vein, I absolutely support IVF, and I appreciate the bill being brought forth, the continued work that's being done on it. And I also wanted to stress that having those appropriate guardrails and continuing to work with the different stakeholders and individuals who bring up good points, like the last testifier brought up about surrogacy, and making sure that we're protecting women in that process too, so they aren't exploited, and also making sure we're protecting the children. Likewise, making sure that we're doing this in a responsible way. There's over 1.5 million fertilized embryos that are currently frozen in the United States, and there are, I think, over 1,500 children waiting to be adopted in Minnesota also. That doesn't preclude that people shouldn't be able to utilize IVF as well, but they are important points to be made. And if we are going to do this responsibly, similar to what Germany does or other countries that have studied this as well, I think we can learn from other individuals who have gone down this pathway. They realize everybody wants someone to be able to start a family. I mean, truly, that is a critical part of us as humans. And so within that, being the father of 6 children and my wife having a miscarriage, our first child was miscarried, that is an extremely difficult process to go through. And for individuals who have gone through that multiple times, we have family members and friends too. So I am extremely sympathetic to that. I just want to stress that those guardrails that were addressed earlier, if those are in place, I can fully support this bill. I can't support it in its current state, but I'm very happy to hear that you're continuing to work on it and look forward to hearing about the progress. Thank you.
Any comments? Representative Katiz.
Just briefly, Mr. Chair, thank you so much, Representative DePel, for sharing your story of your brother, and so sorry to hear that you and your wife had to go through a miscarriage earlier on. I had mentioned that my husband and I dealt with infertility when we were beginning to build our family, and while I never actually got pregnant through assisted reproductive medicine, we didn't go through IVF. Big part of that was because of the cost, and I have a large fear of needles. But we, ultimately at that point in our life, we were quite young and decided that spending that kind of money or taking out loans and some of the financial decisions that other folks have to make was not a choice that we wanted to make. And so we actually pivoted and we adopted 3 kids out of the Minnesota Waiting Child Program. And I always do like to bring that up as a part of my testimony when I talk about this bill, because there are so many different ways that people can build a family. And, and it's not blood to me that makes a family, it's love. And I know that there are adoptive parents on both sides of the aisle in this room today, and just, appreciate us fully considering all of those options. And one thing I think that, to the final testifier's point about foreign nationals coming into the United States to utilize surrogacy services, foreign nationals don't actually have United States health insurance. And so, unless they were to be Minnesota residents that had come here, naturalized, and were working through a United States healthcare program that we've subsidized here in Minnesota via the Minnesota Building Families Program, that would not be something that would be covered under this bill. So just wanted to point that out as well.
Thank you. Representative Gilman.
Thank you so much, Chair.
All right, you were just listening to a discussion about a bill in relation to infertility treatments and the requirements and medical assistance expected from health providers. Many of them, you just heard, they're sharing their own stories of IVF treatments or infertility issues as well. Okay, we are still watching a lot of things going on at our state capitol, and one person who is there to witness it all is our political reporter, Corin Hoggard. So he will speak with us coming up right after the break. We'll be right back.